The events described in this video took place in the American state of South Carolina. Jessica Carpenter lived with her parents and two older sisters in the city of Aiken. Aiken is not a large city, the population of which is about 30,000 people. Therefore, the news of what happened to Jessica Carpenter spread very quickly through the city and attracted the attention of the media. On August 4, 2000, Judy, Jessica's mother, came home and found her daughter's body lying on the floor. She was 17 years old. More than 5 years passed before the perpetrator was held accountable. Jessica was a senior at Aiken High School where she played in the school band. During the summers, she worked part-time as a hostess at a local restaurant called Red Lobster. Vacations were coming to an end, and she was excited to begin her final year of high school. That day, August 4, 2000, Jessica and her mother Judy had lunch together, after which Judy left for work and Jessica was left home alone. That was the last time Judy saw her daughter alive. Judy got home at about 5:30 p.m. Opening the door, she took a few steps before she saw something no mother should ever see. Her daughter was lying naked on the floor and showing no signs of life. Terrified, Judy ran out to her car and called 911. When she explained the situation, the operator asked Judy to go back into the house and check to see if Jessica was breathing. Judy was gripped with fear, but nevertheless, she went back into the house. She did everything the operator told her to do. After a brief pause, Judy informed the operator that Jessica was not breathing. She was cold. Medics and police immediately rushed to the scene. Jessica was pronounced dead at the scene. Police first inspected the house to make sure the perpetrator was not hiding somewhere inside. A telephone wire was wrapped around Jessica's neck, and there was also a stab wound on her neck. Jessica was not wearing any clothes, and this fact made it obvious what motivated the crime. Judging from the atmosphere in the house, Jessica fought back. Struggles occurred in her bedroom, kitchen, and living room. Crime scene investigators took DNA samples from Jessica's body and partially lifted fingerprints. There was little physical evidence. A partial fingerprint was found, and that was a little frustrating for investigators. The only significant evidence the police found was unknown male DNA. Aside from the DNA, there was virtually nothing in the case to hold on to. Before leaving the scene, detectives noticed another important detail. There were no signs of forced entry. Jessica was home alone, and in cases like this, she always locked her doors. It was obvious that she either knew the perpetrator or felt safe enough to let this person into the house. People were shocked that something like this happened in their neighborhood because it had never happened before. There was not a lot of crime in the neighborhood. During the forensic examination, it was determined that Jessica died from internal bleeding and lack of oxygen. The Carpenter family home, once filled with laughter and life, was now shrouded in an impenetrable shadow of mourning. The living room, the scene of quiet family evenings and raucous birthday parties, had become the scene of a terrible crime. Jessica's parents, Charles and Judy, seemed lost in time. Their world was shattered. The thought that they had failed to protect their daughter kept them at peace. Jessica's sisters were devastated by what had happened, but it was a time when the family rallied together. The Carpenters were determined and believed the police would find the person responsible for Jessica's death. Aiken is a small city, so news of what happened to Jessica Carpenter spread very quickly. Every local television station and every newspaper covered the story. There are times when law enforcement needs the media. To help solve crimes, they need the public to know about it. And while investigators shared some information about the crime with the press, key details were kept secret. The information that Jessica was shot in the neck, that she was strangled with a telephone wire, and that she was found naked was kept secret. On August 25, 2000, 3 weeks after Jessica's death, police received the first information and, using local news reports, disseminated it. Investigators got hold of surveillance footage from a convenience store located just a few blocks from the house where Jessica lived. Their attention was drawn to the young man in the upper right corner of your screen. and detectives believed he might know something about Jessica Carpenter's death. The police wanted to identify him and question him as part of an ongoing investigation. Every lead, no matter how insignificant it may seem, was scrutinized very carefully. Based on surveillance video, the Aiken police published a sketch that was shown on television in hopes that someone would recognize the man. The detectives investigating Jessica Carpenter held the sketch of the suspect in their hands as if it were the key that could unlock the doors of truth. They went to Aiken High School, where Jessica attended, and where everyone knew her. They made their way to the principal's office to seek support from the administration. The principal looked at the sketch, but did not recognize the person depicted in it. After talking to the principal, the detectives began interviewing Jessica's classmates. Every conversation, every tiny remark could be a clue to the crime. There were some students who were in special interest groups with Jessica. Members of the school orchestra, for example. Detectives also talked to teachers who knew Jessica. However, after spending several hours at the school, they came away with nothing. No one knew who was depicted in this sketch. After a few days, the police managed to identify the man, but as it turned out, he had nothing to do with what happened to Jessica. He was just an out-of-city student who sold magazines. Since the police had little information, they reached out to Jessica's closest people. Alice Bryant was one of her best friends at Aiken High School. She met Jessica in 6th grade. She and Jessica played in the music orchestra. They were both looking forward to senior year, preparing for college and growing up. The investigators asked Alice to tell them if there were people around Jessica who wanted to harm her. Maybe she had a fight with someone at school. Maybe she rejected one of the boys and he couldn't deal with it. But Alice claimed that Jessica didn't have any enemies. She got along well with everyone. So it was another dead end in the investigation. With Jessica's friends unable to provide any leads, the police turned to the only hard evidence found at the crime scene, the DNA of an unknown male. A database check revealed no matches. Given that Jessica probably let the perpetrator into the house herself, and that she may have known and trusted the man, detectives decided to check Jessica's inner circle. They took DNA samples from her family, friends, and neighbors. They went to Judy's workplace and interviewed all the men, including her supervisor. To rule out as many potential suspects as possible, the Aiken police asked the local media to spread the word. They asked the men to come forward and voluntarily submit a DNA sample. About 300 DNA samples were tested. Of course, the perpetrator was not stupid enough to help the police. Among the samples tested, there was no DNA that matched the DNA found on Jessica's body. 2 months after Jessica Carpenter's death, another similar crime occurred, but this time in Georgia. This time, the victim was 18 years old. By some miracle, Chrisley Barton survived and told what happened to her. Chrisley said that she met a man in the parking lot of a restaurant. He offered to model for her. She asked to see his identification, but the man refused to show it. When the man asked Chrisley if he could walk her home, she reluctantly agreed, which she soon regretted. He attacked her in her home, ripped off her clothes, and you can of course understand what happened after that. The man then began to strangle her and stabbed her 3 times. He thought she was dead, but Chrisley managed to survive. She crawled to the phone and called 911. She later gave the police a description of the man. It seemed obvious that the same man who had attacked Chrisley Barton had also attacked Jessica Carpenter. There were too many similarities between the 2 crimes. As soon as the sketch hit the news, the police station received calls from women who claimed to have seen the man in the photo. One call came from Jessica Carpenter's former Red Lobster colleague who recognized the man in the sketch. She reported that she had worked with Jessica the week before she was murdered, and as they were chatting on the street, the man approached them. He stopped and asked for directions to somewhere. They tried to explain to him where he had to go, and then he asked if either of them could go with him and show him the exact way. They both refused. From their shirts, the man realized where they worked. A week after this conversation, Jessica was murdered, leading investigators to wonder if it was a mere coincidence or if something more was lurking afterward. The sketch of the perpetrator was shown on every newscast, and thanks largely to this, 3 days later, the police had a name. His name was Reynaldo Rivera. He was put on the wanted list. The police wanted to find him as soon as possible because he could hurt someone else. His car was found in a motel parking lot, and several officers drove there to arrest him. When they burst into the room where Rivera was staying, the news was just coming on the television, and it was once again showing a sketch of the suspect. By this time, Rivera was lying unconscious on the floor. To escape justice, he thought of nothing better than to take a blade and harm himself. But the police arrived in time, and he survived. Now detectives had to figure out who Reynaldo Rivera was and if he was involved in what happened to Jessica Carpenter. Born in Madrid, Spain, in the family of a doctor, Rivera and his family moved to Puerto Rico when he was 7 years old. At age 19, he joined the United States Navy, serving in Orlando, Florida, and San Diego, California. As an adult, between December 1986 and March 1991, Rivera worked for the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington, D.C., attending the University of South Carolina, where he earned a degree in office administration. He previously resided in Graniteville, Columbia, and Fayetteville, North Carolina, before settling in North Augusta. On Valentine's Day in 1993, he married Tammy Lisa Bonnett and had 2 children. By 1998, Rivera acquired a job as a tire inspector for the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company in Aiken. No one suspected that he led a second secret life. Aiken police and Jessica's family were convinced they had found the person responsible for her death. But when investigators searched the motel room where Rivera was staying, they got a surprise. He left a note saying he had nothing to do with Jessica Carpenter's death. Reynaldo Rivera was arrested for assaulting Chrysele Barton. Police thought he might also be connected to the Jessica Carpenter case. They thought that would be the end of it, that the case would be closed. But instead of confessing to Jessica's murder, Rivera stuns police by confessing to another series of unsolved crimes. On July 17, 1999, 17-year-old Melissa Faye Dingus from Graniteville, South Carolina, vanished without a trace. In the ensuing searches, deputies from the Aiken County Sheriff's Office reported that a girl matching Dingus's description was seen on 2 occasions, accompanied by an older white male with dark hair. She entered a tan, older model vehicle in the first instance and, in the second, a bright red 4-door one. On October 13, 2000, her skeletal remains were found in the woods off the I-20 near Harlem, Georgia, 7 miles west of the Savannah River, after Rivera gave police directions to the burial site. On December 4th, 17-year-old Tiffany Sharice Wilson from Jackson went missing while she and her 2-month-old daughter Caitlin were visiting a Winn-Dixie grocery store in North Augusta. Her car was found in the parking lot, with witnesses seeing her enter a mid-1980s white 4-door Ford, which had stopped briefly and sped off quickly. 3 days later, Caitlin was found abandoned in her car in front of a Georgia Welcome Center across the state border. On December 30th, 2 hunters discovered the body of a young female in a heavily wooded area near Graniteville. The decedent was later positively identified as Wilson via her fingerprints. On June 19, 2000, 18-year-old Tabitha Lee Bosdell of Augusta, Georgia, disappeared in similar circumstances to the previous victims. According to her family members, they dropped her off at a Huddle House where she was going to apply for a second part-time job before going to her main job as a telemarketer. Her remains were found and identified, after which Rivera was charged. On September 5, 2000, Marnie Marie Glisto was assaulted in her home. She was 21 years old. She suffered serious injuries but survived. She was taken to a local hospital where she died of her injuries 5 days later. She became Reynaldo Rivera's 4th known victim. On October 10, 2000, Rivera attacked Chrysele Barton, who managed to survive, and thanks to whom police had a sketch. All of Rivera's victims were around the same age, and all of his crimes followed the same pattern. All ended with strangulation and stab wounds to the neck. Rivera, 37, was placed in solitary confinement, where he was under constant medical supervision to ensure he could not harm himself. Although Rivera confessed to 5 other crimes, he denied any involvement in what happened to Jessica Carpenter. Police obtained Rivera's DNA and rushed the sample to a lab. For Jessica's family, waiting for the results was unbearable. But just when the Aiken Police Department thought they had caught the culprit, a new twist came to the case. Police informant Craig Gant told authorities that the man, Tony Baldwin, had confessed to him to the murder of Jessica Carpenter. Tony Baldwin was already in the Aiken County Jail on another murder charge. Now DNA samples have been taken from him to see if he was involved in Jessica's death. Her family, her friends, and the police could only wait. By January 2001, the DNA results of both men were in, and the entire community held its breath. In a shocking turn of events for Jessica Carpenter's family, not 1 but 2 suspects in her murder were cleared of charges. Rivera's DNA and Tony Baldwin's DNA did not match the DNA found in the house and on Jessica's body. This was a major disappointment to both the family and investigators. Weeks passed, then months, but the case remained unsolved. However, 2 years after Jessica's death, on August 19, 2002, the detective who investigated the case received a call from the lab. They found a DNA match. The man it belonged to was named Robert Atkins, and he was in prison in Georgia. Robert Atkins was in trouble with the law. He was convicted of theft. He violated his probation in the state of Georgia and was sent back to prison. At the time, Georgia was one of the few states where, when prisoners were admitted, their DNA was collected from them and entered into a national database. That's how a DNA match was found, one might say by accident. Had Atkins behaved himself and not broken the law again, perhaps he never would have been linked to the Jessica Carpenter case. Investigators were stunned, and at the same time they wanted to know why he did it. How did he know Jessica? And who is he anyway? His name had never appeared in the Jessica Carpenter case before. A detective went to the prison to find answers to these questions. He began questioning Atkins, and he denied knowing Jessica. Then the detective started talking about the suffering of Judy, Jessica's mother, that she was just devastated, that she didn't know what to do or how to move on with her life. Atkins looked at the detective and said that he was sorry. He began to cry and asked for a break in the interview. He then confessed to killing Jessica Carpenter. Atkins later led investigators to the murder weapon, a bloody knife wrapped in a t-shirt that was buried under a bush. Based on Atkins's confession, investigators pieced together what happened to Jessica Carpenter. A week before her murder, Robert Atkins, an airborne express courier, delivered a package to Jessica's home. The following week, August 4, 2000, Atkins returned, but this time under false pretenses. Jessica opened the door, and Atkins said that he had probably delivered the package by mistake last week. Jessica replied that there had been no mistake. Atkins then asked if he could go inside and use the phone. Jessica allowed him in. He pretended to be on the phone with someone. When he realized there was no one else in the house, he attacked Jessica, carried her into the bedroom, and forced her to undress. She said she wouldn't tell anyone, but he looked at her and said, "No, you know me." He took a knife from the kitchen and then cut the phone cord in the kitchen as well. He used the phone cord to strangle Jessica and stabbed her in the neck. He then left, taking the knife with him, and continued to deliver packages in his van. The next day, he got married like nothing had happened, as if nothing had happened the day before. Jessica's family members felt anger when they learned the details of the crime. Jessica was gullible. She invited him into the house, offered him a glass of water. She was kind to him, and then he committed this horrible crime. On May 22, 2006, Robert Atkins struck a deal with prosecutors and pleaded guilty to 5 charges. He was facing the death penalty, but he agreed to plead guilty in exchange for a life sentence. Judge Diane Goodstein asked Atkins whether he understood that he will never be released from prison. "Do you understand that you will spend the remainder of your life behind bars?" she asked him. "Out feet first in a box." He said he did. Atkins was sentenced to 2 life sentences. As for Reynaldo Rivera, he was sentenced to death in 2004. Rivera told the jury that he was mentally ill and that doctors needed to study his illness to find a cure. He also said he still fantasized about killing his victims, warning that he would do it again if he was released, and asked for the death penalty. 12 years later, in 2016, Rivera recanted his testimony and began attempting to appeal his sentence. In October 2024, the court dismissed his final appeal.